Hello everyone, welcome to Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Cannici, and today I am honored to have longtime coach, longtime writer, and longtime sports talk show host, Rich Marazzi. And Rich, welcome to the show.
Mike, thanks.
It is an honor to have you on. Rich, there's so much to cover, but let's get started right away. I believe the journey for you in sports began when you were in high school at Ansonia High.
Yes, actually, since I can remember, my father, he was my inspiration. He would take me to various events as a kid and got me involved in sports, even as a young kid playing Little League baseball and that kind of thing. So really, sports began for me. I remember going to the Hill House West Haven game in the Yale Bowl in 1948 when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
There were 40,000 people that day there. It was probably the first organized event I ever was at. But my father, with his love for sports, I think, is the one that really got me in just about everything. And then in high school, I played ball, and so just been a sports enthusiast all my life, I guess.
Now, it goes without saying that baseball has always been your love, but what kind of sports did you play when you were a kid besides baseball? Did you play basketball as a kid, biddy and stuff?
I played a lot of basketball. I was captain of our grammar school team, Lincoln School. I played freshman basketball. But after that, I played more of a community basketball. I played for the Falcons in Ansonia.
Right.
My last name was Marazzi with the Falcons. Had to put an SKI on the end.
Oh, really?
And
wow.
I played a few years of football, and so just a little bit. Of course, back in those days too, there was no overlapping seasons. Whatever season it was, that's what we played back in the 50s and 60s. It isn't like today where an athlete might focus on one sport the entire year. Back in the 50s, whatever season it was, that's the way it was. Things weren't so specialized. And I think that was a good, healthy, fun era for everybody.
Right, definitely. Now, it's no secret you're a big Yankee fan. When you were a kid, when would you say you started getting into the Yankees? Every kid dreams, when I was a kid, I wanted to be Don Mattingly, but who was it for you that, you wanted to be as a kid or you emulated?
Joe DiMaggio. He was the first hero. Of course, I come from an American Italian family, and I had uncles who were born in Italy, and Joe DiMaggio was the first real Italian hero, I think, in the United States.
Right.
For anybody. And I remember as a kid, my parents bought me a baseball shirt with the number 5 on it. My mother sewed a number 5 on it for me. So he was my first real big hero. I caught the end of his career on TV, and after watching the Yankee games, I would go out in the backyard and make believe I was Joe DiMaggio and hit the ball and run around the house. That'd be my infield, basically. And so he was the first one. Then, of course, came Mickey Mantle and all the others. But as I look back, the roots were probably the influence from my father and my uncles. I heard Joe DiMaggio.
Right.
That's all I heard for a long time. And it was Joe DiMaggio versus Ted Williams. And later it was Mickey Mantle versus Ted Williams. So that's the way it was.
Right. And I'm sure you saw Williams play as well as a kid.
Many times.
It's hard to compare because in a lot of ways they were alike, but they were also different type of players as well. If you picked, who would you say you would give the nod to? Who was the better player, in your opinion?
You're talking DiMaggio versus Williams?
Yes.
Well, DiMaggio was the better all-around player.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. And Williams was the better hitter. In my lifetime, he was probably the greatest hitter I've ever seen.
Right.
And I'm talking pre-steroid era now.
Yeah.
Okay, if you go in the steroid era, you got to probably go with Bonds, maybe, I don't know. But Ted Williams, he was just magnificent. Nobody feared anybody like he did Ted Williams. Don't forget, here's a guy had over 500 home runs, and he missed almost 5 years to the military.
Yeah.
And he had over 2,000 walks, which means that if you count his walks and the amount of years he missed with being in the military, because he was he was stationed in Massachusetts in World War II, and then in the Korean War he was a bomber pilot. So if you count everything that he missed about 10 years of baseball, and he still did what he did.
Oh, he was unbelievable. Now let me ask you this, Rich. Would you say watching the Yankees, as a kid and playing in your backyard, wanting to be DiMaggio, would you say that's how baseball became your number one love, or did you just enjoy playing baseball more than anything else?
Well, baseball is probably my number one love. However, I think whatever sport was in season was my number one love too.
Yeah, that happens to a lot of people.
And so I can't say I was just a baseball fanatic. because baseball is the longest season of the year, I think.
Yeah.
I think probably in what I've done professionally with the shows and everything, people identify me with the baseball thing. But I've done a lot with basketball and football too, in a sense. And so I love all sports, really. I guess baseball is the one, though, that I gravitated more to because of my passion too for the baseball rules. And that's what got me into a lot of other things in life. And so when I was umpiring and then writing about baseball rules, that kind of put things together. But so I guess baseball would be number one, but all the others are a close second.
Right. Now you get to high school and you played for Boots Jarvis, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
What was Boots like as a coach? I mean, I know he coached multiple sports at the school, but I mean, did you enjoy playing for Boots? Or?
Boots was bigger than the program. Let's put it that way. Okay, he was probably like the Bear Bryant.
Right.
And when you were a kid, when I was a kid, I can't say feared Boots, but never felt totally comfortable around him. He was different. He was bigger than the program. Matter of fact, he didn't call you by your first name normally. If he called you by your first name, you were very, very special.
Really?
I'll never forget when my father passed away in 1979. He came to the wake and he called me Rich for the first time ever.
Really?
And I almost fainted. I couldn't believe it. But that's how Boots was. And I got to know Boots very well later in life when I was the athletic director at Emmett O'Brien. I came out of college and I was eventually working there, and I would work with Coach Jarvis for scheduling games.
Yeah.
So we got to know each other on a business level, and I learned more about Boots at the time than I ever did as a kid. I had him as a teacher also. He was a great teacher, by the way. He was a history teacher.
Oh, really? Okay.
It was because of him that inspired me to go on to become a history teacher. So he really was a good teacher. However, as a coach, I never felt Frank Allo, his assistant, was the guy that I was most comfortable with, who coached at Ansonia for years.
Yeah.
Eventually went to Derby.
Right.
Okay, coached with Lou DiFilippo. But Coach Allo, I always felt much closer than Coach Jarvis. However, once I got to know Coach Jarvis as an adult, when I became an adult, I saw a different person. I saw a man who was basically probably a shy person, who I just looked at years ago. I took it for just being passive and indifferent. But he really was kind of a shy man, but a very nice man.
Right. Now, how was the baseball program during those years you played? I mean, was it competitive? Was it, were you guys right there in the tournament?
We were competitive. I don't recall even having a tournament back then. I think there's just a handful of teams that maybe comprised the tournament. We were not great. We had one very good pitcher, Dave McClellan. Okay. And when he pitched, we could beat almost anybody.
Right.
We were battery mates. And I remember my senior year, we beat Naugatuck in a 12-inning game. That was a great game. As a matter of fact, George Tanner, who coached at Derby High School for years, was one of my assistants for a time. He knocked me in with the winning run. And it was a 12-inning game. And I think Dave pitched the whole game in those days. That's the way it was. Right. And it was a 2-1 game. But beating Naugatuck was big because Naugatuck was coached by Ray Legenza, who was a legendary coach.
Right.
And had a great program. So when you beat Naugatuck in those days in baseball,
you did something.
You beat one of the best teams in the state usually. So that was probably the biggest win I ever had in high school as far as a baseball player.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, you would go on to play in college afterwards, correct?
Yes, I played at New Paltz in New York, and I enjoyed that very much. It was a different kind of experience. I was older at the time.
Right.
I saw the game differently. I remember one time in practice, we were doing a rundown, and I had a collision with a player, and I tore ligaments in my thumb. And I remember the next game or two catching and being in terrible pain. And I went to the coach, and I said, Coach, I don't know if I can play. And he says, well, 1 year Roy Campanella caught with a broken hand with the Brooklyn Dodgers. When he told me that, it kind of rang a bell, and I said to myself, you know what, there's nothing that's fractured here.
Right.
I said, you know what, I'm just going to suck it up. And I learned how you play in pain a little bit too. And as you go on in life, maybe there's some days you get up in the morning, you don't feel like going to work.
Right.
But you go and you play in pain a little bit, as long as you're not seriously ill, So I learned that from my college experience too. And so you mature as an athlete and you see things differently. In high school, I probably would have been out for a couple of weeks, But
Right.
in college, you learn to just kind of suck it up and just go out and do it.
Right. Now, as your baseball career came to a close in college, I mean, was there a part of you that was, bittersweet, like sad to see it go, but ready to move on to other things, or?
No, I was ready to move on. I think as a kid you have this dream of playing in the major leagues, and I never had the ability to be a major leaguer. I went to a couple of open tryout camps years ago,
Right.
And I did okay defensively, but I didn't have the ability overall to be a professional baseball player. And so the next best thing for me was to go into umpiring, and that's what I did. I love being on the field.
Right.
You know, I'm a field rat, really, and I love being between the foul lines. And so, to me, that was the next closest thing to being a player, was being an umpire.
Keeps you on the field.
I could be right there at home plate. I could be on the bench, do whatever, you know. And so, I umpired for 23 years, and it was a great experience. I did the old timers game at Yankee Stadium for 16 years.
Right.
And so it was a great experience. But I never got into slow pitch softball. You know, years ago in the Valley here, when I was a kid, fast pitch softball was big. We had teams here in the Valley, Windy Hill, that later became the Norwoods, the Vets, Derby had the AM Club, things like that.
Yeah.
Teams. And fast pitch softball was huge. I was too young to play, though, fast pitch softball. And then as I got older, when I came out of college, everything was slow pitch. I never got into it. It's a great game. I just never got into it. And
So
I
you
wanted to stay in
never
baseball.
really played?
I never played slow pitch.
Right. So now the journey begins. Now let me ask you this: when you got out of college, was Emmett O'Brien your first teaching job, or did you go somewhere?
No,
before that?
my first job was at Prendergast School in Ansonia. I
wow.
worked there for 3 years.
Now was it the middle school then? The
No,
junior
no,
high?
it was a K through 7 school,
Right.
K through 8.
K through
And I taught grade 7 and 8. I coached the basketball team for 3 years. We won the Valley Championship my final year, which kind of opened the door for me to go to Emmett O'Brien, which was opening up at that time.
Right.
And so, and I coached the Ansonia freshman team for a year, basketball, and I coached freshman football for a couple of years in Ansonia.
Right.
1 year I did it with Mike Cannici as an assistant coach.
Okay.
And then when Ron Carbone came from Derby to coach at varsity, I stayed there 1 year with Ron. And then after he left is when I left also. And then eventually I got the job at Emmett O'Brien, and that was it.
Now, what was the reason for going to Emmett? It was a better opportunity for you?
Oh, sure. It was.
Yeah.
How many people have a chance to open up a new school, a whole new program?
Right.
See, in 1968, when the school opened, all we had was 9th and 10th graders. So we kind of grew together. Went through the growing pains. We had a freshman basketball team. It was hard to schedule JV because when you call the team for a JV game, they're saying, well, we have to play our JV game for the varsity game. Where can we play? So we had a scattering of JV games the first year. And then the second year, we were able to get a few more games. And by year number 3 was our first varsity season. And that's how it all began. But we all, kind of grew together. It was on-the-job training, and that was it.
Right. Now, from what I hear, I mean, you know better than me, obviously. You were very instrumental in picking the school colors and also the team name. Am I correct?
Right.
Yes. Now, how did you come up first off with the school colors?
Well, at the time in the late '60s, the Green Bay Packers they were the great pro-dominant football franchise, and their colors were green and gold. Packer green and gold.
Right.
And in the Valley, no other school had that color. All right. And so I encouraged the student body and student council. I think we were voting on everything in those days, and which is a good way to do things. And I encouraged us, look at it. I says, everybody, Ansonia has blue, Derby has red, and so on, Shelton, orange and black, Seymour, blue and gold. I said, nobody has green and gold. That's what happened.
Right.
And as far as condors go, they had once again, they had all kinds of possibility for names that the student council voted on. I pushed the word condor. I didn't even know what a condor was till I read from the book when they looked through and I said, it has a nice ring to it, condor, and it was a vulture. It's a vulture type bird, has an aggressive name to it, and I think we're only the second school in the country that ever had that name. I believe, because I know the USA Today one time put out a article about the school in California. I think they were called the Condors, that they were the only school in the country with that nickname. And we wrote into them and said, no, you're not the only school. There's a school in Ansonia, Connecticut called the Condors also.
Oh, wow. That's
and
awesome.
we had a big condor in the middle of our basketball court as our symbol, and it was good.
Okay, so now, how did you go about getting the job? Was it presented to you, the opportunity, or did you apply for it? How did it becoming the head coach of Emmett O'Brien?
Well, when my last year at Prendergast School, which was the 67-68 school year, they were building Emmett O'Brien, the new vocational school.
Yes.
And I remember as the school was built, I brought my team over. I asked the director of the school, his name was Norman Eichner. I said, can I have my team practice here one day maybe? You know, we're going to play in a Valley tournament, and which just played at Derby Vet Center at the time. And he said, sure, bring him over. So I brought him over, we practiced, and he was impressed with our organization apparently, and I expressed an interest in transferring to Emmett O'Brien because this is a great opportunity for someone like me to open up, to start a new program. At the time, I was 24 years old. I was young, and we got along very well together, Mr. Eichner. I mean, plus it was a big bump up in pay too.
Right.
See, the state vocational schools at the time, because we brought in shop teachers, guys that were in the trade, they're making pretty good money. They're making more money than teachers would make. Right. So to match their salaries, the academic teachers, we also made that kind of money. So it was a good bump up in salary, and I got a chance to be now the head coach, and that was it. And so I'll never forget the same man who hired me. He encouraged me to retire, and 3 years later, we won our first game in the 71-72 season. Then we lost 18 in a row.
Right.
We were competitive, but we were all inexperienced, including me.
Right.
As I look back, I mean, you know, if my team had a better coach, they might have won a few games that year, but they were still inexperienced. We were all inexperienced. And at the end of the season, he encouraged me, you know, he said, I think maybe you're in the wrong profession. So I was ready to quit, and then my fiance, Lois, who's been my lovely wife now for, it'll be 45 years this year.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. She said, you know what? She said, if you think that you could do the job, you do it. Don't listen to him. He was leaving to go to Rhode Island.
Oh.
And I thought because when he wanted to talk to me, I thought he wanted to take me to Rhode Island with him. I said, wow, this is really he's going to boost my ego, you know?
Right.
He wanted to tell me to quit, to retire. And so, anyway, I stayed on.
So he wasn't looking to necessarily replace you. He just was trying to encourage you to move on.
Right. I was in the wrong business.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, sounds like Steinbrenner.
Yeah. And he was a great guy. He was a
Right.
retired Navy guy. Matter of fact, he was aboard the USS Franklin in World War II. And when he made announcements over the PA system, he would say, now hear this, now hear this. We used to call it the USS O'Brien, the school. But he was a great guy, Norman Eichner. He was a man's man. He really was.
Right.
And I really enjoyed working for him. However, subsequent to that, we won 9 games the following year. And then I think we won 12 and then 15 and so on. Eventually, we won 19 games in 1976.
Right.
So, I mean, here's a guy that wanted me to leave, and 5 years later, we're playing in the Haven Coliseum in the semifinals. So it was a lesson for me to be persistent, and I thank my wife at the time, my fiance, for encouraging me to stay with it.
Right. Now, let me ask you, that 1-18 season, did you still enjoy coming to practice every day? Like, did you go home at times, like, stressed? Because, you know, the other thing is, too, when you open a new program like that, very few programs have success right away. So, I mean, you're going to, you know, have some bumps along the way. But, I mean, did you take it home with you a lot? I mean, were you depressed a lot that first year? How would you say you were?
Tough, very, very tough. I don't know if I'd go as far as say depressed, but very, well, first of all, you question your ability as a coach when you win one game. But then again, I had success prior in the 8th grade level, don't forget. And we had won a lot of games in 3 years as Emmett O'Brien, and I thought I was the Johnny Wooden of the world at the time.
Right.
Then I learned a lot. You learn, you know what? 3 things, Mike, to me, affect a coach's final record. 1, your schedule. 2, your talent, and then the coach. Because you could be a great coach, but if your schedule over your head or if you don't have the talent, you're not going to win. If you have great talent, but their schedule is over their head, they're not going to win. Everything's got to be combined to have your set time. To me, coaching records are a bit deceiving. It depends what league you're in, who you're playing.
Yeah.
One year we won 7-13 with one senior. I thought that was one of my best coaching years. We won 7 games.
Right.
We lost several by close scores, and we only had one senior. We had a lot of young kids on the team.
Right.
But I thought that was one of my better coaching years. But that's the way it is.
Now, did you have good people around you, though, those first few years, like good assistants that you brought in?
I had great assistants. Like I told you, we had George Tanner, we had Jack Walsh, I had Joe Cavallero, I had a guy named Tom Chapman, who eventually went on to coach St. Bonaventure College. But George went on to Derby, Jack went to Shelton, Joe went to Seymour.
And Joe also coached at Emmett as the head
coach.
coach.
He was there as head coach. So I had a lot of good, and I had some great assistant coaches too, like Mike Cook.
Right.
From Ansonia. He coached our freshmen for a few years. Mike did an outstanding job. I had John Purick, Stanley Osowicki, Tom Haley. I was lucky to have good assistant coaches. You don't get things done yourself. You need good people around you, believe me.
Right.
And then you learn, and you listen. You learn to listen to people, and they have good ideas. Every one of them brought something new to the table. So Rex brought something different. And I'm the biggest plagiarizer in the world. If I like an idea, I'm going to use it.
Right.
That's how I am.
And you know what I find, remarkable is the fact that, you mentioned George, Jack, and Joe. They all went on to have successful coaching careers. George's first run at Derby, I mean, there was one year I think they went 12-8. Mm-hmm. Had a great year. They had Chris Mester, who was a very good player. And, to me, though, when you have good people around you, it just makes things a lot easier as well, because head coach takes all the blame. They also get the credit, but they have to have the people around them or it's never going to work.
Absolutely. I remember 1978-79 season, we really had a team. It was my most enjoyable team because nobody expected us to do anything that year. And I think we ended up winning 13, 14 games. And our last game was against Shelton. And Shelton had a player named George Dokla, who was a great shooter.
Yeah.
And we noticed every night, because we used to keep box scores of all our opponents, post them into the locker rooms. We noticed that George was scoring 11, 12 points a night from the foul line.
Right.
So Mike Cook, who was our freshman coach, I said, Mike, we have to find out how this guy is scoring so many points from the foul line. And so Mike went out and scouted Shelton 3 or 4 games. And he came back and said, well, every time George penetrates the foul line extended, he keeps pumping, and everybody's leaving their feet. So we used to drill every day on keeping our line of verticality, 101 drills, and not leaving your feet, and that kind of thing. And so I remember at practice that week, we were doing 101 drills, and anybody who left their feet, we put the balls in a rack, we run suicides. Well, by game time, we were like cigar store Indians. Everybody was just like that.
Right.
And George come up, and he's doing all pumping, and we're like that. Well, he ended up, I think, making 2 foul shots that night. We won the game by 18 points.
Right.
And I thank Mike Cook for it. I mean, Mike is the one that gave us the great scouting report, and so that was it.
Now, you mentioned, like we just talked about George, Jack. Jack coached at Shelton, George at Derby. You had a pretty good record against the Valley schools for the most part. In fact, I think you were undefeated against Seymour. Mm-hmm. And you only had 1 loss against Derby, but I have always heard there's a story behind that loss. Did you want to talk about that loss? Or?
Well, we were playing in Derby, and it was the last year, my final year of coaching, and we were playing, and they had Gene Cirillo.
Okay.
Gene Cirillo?
Yes. Yep.
And George, my good friend George, was coaching, and John DeFrancisco was on the clock, okay? And then John's a great guy, and I umpired many of his baseball games for years. He's really a wonderful man. Anyway, we had a 1-point lead. Derby had the ball with, I think it was 4 seconds to go in the game, and there was a timeout. And Derby had the ball. They're going to take the ball out on the side of the court by their own basket, and they got the ball in bounds. And it took forever for that clock to go down to 0, but it was moving.
Right.
And Cirillo throws up a buzzer beater. At the time, there was no 3-point line. If there was, it might have been a 3-point shot. He threw it from the sideline, and we lost the game. And I remember I ran up to John after the game. He was doing the clock, John DeFrancisco, and I says, this is ridiculous. I mean, 4 seconds? Come on. Anyway, he didn't say a word to me, and I said, well, maybe I was overly excited about it because I'm the coach. Obviously, I'm a little biased. Well, about 15, 20 years later, I'm with my family at a restaurant one night in Milford, and my son Rich, was with us, and Brian, my other son, and we were sitting together. We were sitting there having dinner. My wife was there, and who comes in but John and his wife?
Right.
And John says, "Hey, Rich, remember that night when you had the argument with me about the clock?" I says, "Yeah." He says, "Let me tell you what I did." He said, "When the ball was passed in bounds, I would put it forward, back, forward, back." Man. I said, "Are you serious?" He says, "Yeah." So I never forget. Every time I see him, I kid him about it, really.
Right.
But yeah, he said, "Well," George needed to win more than you did." so
one thing about D, he was always honest.
He was honest, but you know what? When you go play on the road, you got to be careful. That's the way it is too. However, unless he was exaggerating that he didn't do it his own, but it did take quite a long time for that clock to go for ticked out 4 seconds.
Right. Now let's talk about,
I want to say it was 1975-76 season. I think it was a big year for Emmett. I think you guys, if I'm not mistaken, finished 17-3 in the regular season.
Right.
And I think 19-4 overall. So when you get right down to it, that first season, which, you know, was rough, it was 1-18. In 4 years, though, you went from 1-18 to 19-4. I mean, that had to be one of the most special seasons for you. Did you want to talk about that season a little bit?
Absolutely. I mean, we had great talent, and I learned one thing in coaching: you have to have chicken to make chicken salad. You don't take all the credit yourself. I had good players. I mean, we had outstanding players that year. Guys like Joey Oliva in the backcourt. We had Dan Magda. These are kids from Derby.
Right.
And we had from Ansonia, we had Chris Calling, who eventually was an All-Stater.
Right.
We had Donnie Dreher, was the youngest sophomore at the time, who was an All-Stater. We had Greg Daniels, Scott Ruskowski. We had a very good. We were very deep in there. We were like 8-9 deep. You know, when you're 8-9 deep as a coach, it's fine. The only problem is keeping everybody happy. And so I learned in coaching that if you have 3 guards you can rotate, maybe 4 kids in the front court, that's the ideal rotation. When you have to go farther than that, but we were so deep, we played a lot of kids, but we were winning games by big scores. And that year we beat Ansonia twice, both close games.
Right.
And so as I look, and plus we played in the Haven Coliseum. I remember when they were building the Coliseum, I would drive by and I say, wow, someday I'd like to have my team play in there. And who would think that so soon that we'd be playing in there? It was a great thrill.
That had to be awesome.
Prior to that, though, we had a kid named, our first All-Valley player was a boy named Warren Wazowski from Shelton.
Okay.
Warren was a good shooter. And then we had a tall boy named Paul Zeiner who went on to play college basketball at UB and then in Belgium played professional basketball.
Right.
Paul came in as a very uncoordinated freshman. I think by the time he came out of high school, he was 6'10". So I'm proud that we had several kids go on to play college ball also. And he went on to play college plus professional ball in Europe.
Right.
So from a small school, we were like the Hoosiers, you know.
Right.
We're really unheard of. And but it was, as I look back during my lifetime, that was one of my great experiences. You never reach the euphoria in any profession like you reach in coaching when you come off big wins.
Right.
It's just it's the euphoria that you can't explain. It could become an addiction, you know. That's why it's hard to get out of the game sometimes, because you can never replace that.
Right. Now, a lot of work goes into coaching. It's not just practice. It's not just, you know, showing up for the games. You have to scout a lot. You have to watch film. And, you know, in the 70s, I don't think film was as high-tech as it obviously is now. Did you find that hard as a coach back then, scouting and trying to watch film of other teams?
Well, we didn't get much. You just said we didn't get much film. It was seldom we were able to watch film in those days. But
right.
But scouting, on cold winter nights when you have a night off, you want to be home, but you're conscious. You know, I really should scout this team because we're going to play them. So you go. And sometimes
right.
my wife Lois would even actually join me. And she'd help me scout and things like that, and she was very good, by the way, at it. And but it wasn't only the scouting. As the summertime, going to the clinics, the camps. You know, I really learned my basketball from the great coaches in the country. I've seen all the great stocks: Johnny Wooden, Bobby Knight, Al McGuire, Dean Smith,
right.
And I learned something from all of them. And you take back what you get from these guys and you apply it to your own program, and you get something from everybody, and coaches who are even names that you don't even hear of. But I've seen Lefty Driesell, Pete Carrillo from Princeton, all the great coaches, and I've seen them maybe sometimes several times. And you just learn a lot. And I love doing that. I love coming back with new material for the kids because they deserve it. The kids work hard. They are in weight training. They go to school all day, and then they're at practice. They deserve the best. And so I always felt that if I want my kids to be prepared, I've got to be prepared as well. That's why we did it.
Right. And, you know, you just were talking about the great coaches in the country. What I find unique is the fact that most coaches don't encourage their kids to, you know, watch they're not telling them not to watch the NBA, but they're telling them watch college basketball if you want to learn how to play the game right. It's amazing how great college basketball is. I really think that it's so much better than the NBA. Not that I want to disrespect the NBA, but I just don't think they play the style of basketball that a kid should be, you know,
Absolutely.
watching.
As a matter of fact, if I was coaching today, the team that I would tape and have my kids watch would be UConn women. I think I think women's college basketball is the purest form of, at the highest level we're talking about, is the purest form of basketball you can get today, because they don't play the game over the rim. Most high school basketball players cannot do what the Division I basketball players can do.
Right.
And so therefore, it's a different game. However, when you watch UConn women play, they do a little bit of everything. You watch the way they cut, the way they pass, the way they screen, the way they move the ball. It's really a beauty to watch. Princeton, when Pete Carell coached, he was a master of the back door.
Yeah.
You know, I would go to all their games in New Haven when they played Yale, and it was beautiful basketball. I'm not particularly big into the two-man game or the one-on-one stuff. Maybe I'm a little old-fashioned. You know, Mike, the game has really changed. When I coached back in the 70s, it was an outside-in game where you worked the ball inside. That was the idea of it. And you took your shots from the outside, don't get me wrong. But if you got the ball inside, usually you went to the hoop. Now the idea is to get the ball inside and then pitch out to someone to shoot a three-pointer.
Yep.
The game has flip-flopped. And what that has done to the game is it has, in my opinion, discouraged a lot of cutting and screening and passing. So I'm not a big proponent of the three-point line. I guess it's good for the fans, that kind of thing. But I think the three-point line has damaged the game to a point too.
Right. Now, I want to get into some of the great players you coached, but one player in particular, you know, you were talking about how when you left baseball, you got into umpiring because you loved the game, you wanted to be on the field. Well, one of your former players has had a very successful career as a referee, Jeff Smith. You know, Jeff was a pretty good player when he played. You know, I would even go as far as say great. How gratifying is it for you as someone who coached him to see him doing so well and, you know, refereeing and stuff?
First of all, Mike, Jeff is a greater person than he was a player.
Right.
And he was a great player.
Him and his brother Sam.
Two great players. And I'm not sure you're aware of this, but Jeff donated, he was a kidney to his brother Sam.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Did not know that.
And I remember he called me the week it happened. This was just about maybe, I'm going to say 6-7 years ago. And he called me on a Monday night. He said, Coach, he said, I'm going to be giving a kidney to Sam on Thursday. I says, wow. So my wife and I visited them on Friday. They were both in the same room, and it was an amazing visit. But getting back to Jeff again, and by the way, Sam was on that team, by the way, that 76 team. He was the other guard, basically, with Joey Oliva. He was a heck of a player. But anyway, Jeff is the only player I ever had that could play all 5 positions.
Right.
Okay, he could do everything. We were small. We were a small team. And you can't get a quicker outlet pass and then a rebound from Jeff Smith and bring the ball to court. He sometimes would go coast to coast. Just rebound the ball and go. And so Jeff was just and he was probably one of the nicest kids you ever want to meet. Just a beautiful, beautiful kid.
Yeah,
and to
always
see
a
him,
nice guy.
him have the success he's had in officiating is very gratifying. As a matter of fact, he would call me on occasion, and I'd go watch some of his games. And now I think he's working in the WNBA.
Yes.
And just a great, great, wonderful fella. And I got the utmost respect for Jeff and his family, by the way. And Jeff and Sam are both good friends. They visit me at my home from time to time. But Jeff probably was the best all-around player we ever had at Emmett O'Brien.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yeah, the best all-around player. Didn't make All-State, but did a little bit of everything. He could pass, he can run, he can shoot. He ran the court like like a greyhound. He was all over the place. He's in great condition. I remember before his senior year, you see him running around up around Wakely Avenue, and when he came to us, he was just in wonderful condition his senior year and did a marvelous job.
Right. Now, what are some of the other players you would say that you coached? You know, were there any that when they came in they were kind of raw and then left where they became great players?
I think Paul Zeiner, the kid who was 6'10", he came in very raw, and Chris Calling. Both of those kids came in where they needed a lot of work. And so we had as part of practice, and which I learned from watching the college coaches and everything, we would break our practices down into big man, small man development. And with the big man development stuff, we did a lot of jump roping. Actually, all the kids did. We did tire work. We did a lot of footwork with the ball, drop step, all the stuff. And to watch them develop and go on to camps, the summer camps was great.
Right.
They would further improve themselves that way, play in the summer leagues. I think that's the most gratifying thing about coaching is watching the kids develop. That's the most gratifying thing. But those two players, who both made All-State, by the way, I remember Chris Carling eventually played University of Hartford, and their coach, Gary Palladino, called me, and he said, Rich, he said, we like to recruit Chris. He says, what do you think? I said, look, Gary, I'll be very honest with you. Chris, he was like your Dave Cowens type of player. He was a blue-collar player, okay? Best offensive rebounder I ever saw in high school, by the way. I didn't teach him that. He had a great instinct for that. I said, Gary, I said, Chris, don't forget, is a Class M center. He could play with his back to the basket in the Class M level.
Right.
At your level, he can't do that. He said, I'll tell you what, we like him so much, we'll find a way to use him. And he had him as a power forward. He ended up having a good career. And he ended up being inducted into the New England Hall of Fame this past year, which we went to visit.
That's great.
And so, talk about a kid with a great work ethic, Chris Carling, incredible. And we used to have sunrise shooting in the morning before class.
Right.
And I couldn't make it mandatory because being a regional high school, kids come in on buses and anybody who comes, I said, I'll be there at 7:15, 7:20. You can shoot till 7:45. I said, anybody that takes 3,000 shots, we'll give you a little plaque at the banquet. I think Chris took 5,000 shots one year.
Wow.
Incredible. And we beat Ansonia that year at their gym. If I recall, Chris made 11, 12 foul shots and broke a school record, and we beat him by a point. So how important was that?
Oh, yeah, definitely important.
And he couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time when he came in.
So that's got to be, gratifying for you as a coach. What do you find more gratifying, though? I mean, obviously, you want to have a successful program. You want to win. A goal is to, win a championship down the road. But do you find that seeing these men come out as men and better basketball players is more satisfying to you? What would you say?
Absolutely. It was, and that is the most important. I'll tell you a little story. Paul Zeiner, who was our first All-Stater.
Right.
Paul married a lovely young lady who was an English teacher in Stratford, lived in Stratford, and they had a son who was born with, I guess, a lot of calcium on the brain. Oh. And he was retarded. I mean, severely. His name was Eric. And anyway, Paul, he went to the Ripton School, Eric, okay? Paul every day took him for a ride late in the afternoon. One day, I guess, Eric, I think Paul's wife was running the vacuum cleaner and it startled Eric. And Paul got him out of the house. And every day, Eric had to go for a ride. Paul took him for a ride every day, rain, snow, or shine, late in the afternoon. And when Eric graduated from Ripton School, Paul threw a big party at his home. And this was Eric's high school graduation, his college graduation, his wedding day, and everything all in one.
Wow.
And when I got home that night, I wrote Paul a letter. I said, Paul, whatever you did on the basketball court is secondary to what you've done in life as a husband and as a father. And that's what's most important.
Absolutely.
You see, to watch these guys raise their sons and go on to be successful people themselves. Right. That is much more important. And Chris Carling today, he actually just bought a golf course in North Carolina.
Really?
He was a very successful businessman.
That's great.
He probably made millions. Today he owns his own golf course. It's a big yacht, big boat, okay? And, Donnie Dreer, who was one of our All-Staters, done very well. He's out in California.
Right.
Big business. So to see these kids do well, that's what it's all about. And several of our players have gone on and done very well.
Right. Now, I want to say the 79 season would be your last season there.
78, 79.
Now, were you just burned out from coaching? Or I know you were getting very involved with writing. Did you just want to make a change and do something else? I mean, what was the reasoning behind leaving?
I think I felt I needed a different challenge. And as I look back, I probably should have stayed 2 or 3 or 4 years longer. There's several kids I regret not coaching, including Donnie Palmer, who is your brother-in-law, I believe.
Right, yeah.
A great ball player. I went to grammar school and high school with his mother, Carolyn.
Right.
However, I think I was ready for a different challenge at the time. And so I was doing some writing, and that's what I did. And I can't regret it either because it's carried me through life. I mean, it's been an interest of mine, a passion of mine also. And so I still stay in the game of basketball in different ways. I watch the game. I go to the game, go to games. But I just felt I needed a different challenge. I don't know if the word was burnt out or not, but I think maybe somewhat.
Right.
Don't forget, basketball, you lose actually the Thanksgiving holiday weekend.
Yes.
Because you're okay, which I always loved that week, by the way. Then you got Christmas, and then you got the February vacation you lose because if you get to the tournament, say, which was good. So you lose the Christmas vacation, the February vacation, 3 major. So maybe that was all part of it too. It catches up to you after a while.
You also had young kids. I believe your oldest son was maybe 5 at the time, and your youngest was maybe 2.
Right.
Yes.
Richie was born in 1975, and Brian was born in 78. And you know what, too? One of the things why I left was because we also had a team that year that was overachieved more than any other team I ever coached. And I said, you know what? I want to go out with a good taste in my mouth, too.
Right.
I don't want to hang on too long and end up leaving with a team where I had trouble with the kids, maybe, or we had some kind of controversy, and I left with the best. This is maybe the time to go. Go out when I can't say I was on top. I didn't win a state championship. We had a great year the year. We had a very good year, and beating Shelton, a double L school, in our home court on the last game of the year at home.
Beat that, yeah.
I said, you know what? What else is there for me to do? I didn't think I could bring it's hard to bring a vocational school to a high school state championship program. It really is.
Right.
You don't get the same talent you do normally at the public schools. And we didn't have a feeder program like you could when you're a public high school coach.
Right.
So whoever showed up in 9th grade in September, whatever we started, that was it. And so that's what we did.
Did you know going into that season it would be your last, or did you just decide after the year was over you were going to step down?
I think I was thinking about it, but I didn't know until it was over.
Right.
And I remember finally during the summer is when I decided, and I remember I brought the kids up to my house that day, and we sat on the deck, and the kids who were returning,
Right.
And I told them before I told anybody else. And that's how we did it. But it's not an easy thing to do. But at the time, I was at peace with myself as a basketball coach. The opposite as I was in 1971. So it took me a decade, but I got there.
Now, did you recommend Joe Cav to be the coach? Did you tell him you wanted to be, or was there somebody in between Joe Cav?
Yeah, actually, if I remember, I think Ray DeAngelis replaced me. Ray got to get the job there as a phys ed teacher, and I think he was the first coach after me.
Right.
And then I think Joe Cavallero came.
Right. And, Joe, I don't know a lot about Ray, but Joe had a very successful time at Emmett before he would go on to Seymour. He coached Donnie, I believe, Anthony Guerrera. So he had some good players.
Yeah.
So now
George Van Valkenburg.
Right. So now we're going to get more into the write-in, obviously, but let's fast forward a little bit. 1990, I want to say, comes, and you decide to come back to coaching, this time with the girls program. Was 1990 the year? Or?
Yeah.
Now, what were you missing it, or did?
What happened was Emmett O'Brien at that time, we had a very modest schedule, very small. The girls, we had the smallest female enrollment in the state. We had 6 girls on a team. I think there were 25 girls in the school maybe at the time.
Yeah, not a lot. Right.
And maybe 1 or 2 girls are really what you would call athletes. So anyway, the girl, the woman that was going to be the head coach, she had a part-time position at our school, and she was able to get a job elsewhere about 2 weeks before the season started. So I was left alone with the team. Right. And if I didn't coach, I said, well, these girls aren't going to maybe have a team this year. So I stayed.
Right.
And it proved to be one of the most rewarding years I've ever had. I remember we were 3-8, and we had to win our last 3 games to make the tournament, which we did. And we beat St. Mary's, a Catholic girls team, who blew us out in our gym. It was our last game of the year, and we played them in the Haven.
And beat them. Wow.
We had to win that game to make the tournament, and we played one of the most best games we've ever played. It was a great game the kids played, and and so I was so proud of them. But now we ended the season like the first week of February because we had a modest schedule, a small schedule, and we had to wait 3 or 4 weeks for the tournament. And so, but anyway, and I think we had one senior on that team, but And we made a tournament each year. Each year we got better and better and better. And then I got a job as an administrator, and so I had to leave coaching the girls. But I enjoyed coaching the women. I really did. And you coached really the same in many ways. You
probably can't yell like
you can't yell as right. You got to be careful about that because they get very upset, the girls, very easily.
Right.
And some boys do too, by the way.
Right.
But I had fun. It was great. And you know what? When the girls win or lose, you don't know. When you're on the bus coming home, it's almost the same kind of chatter. Whereas when the boys lost the ball game, it would be very quiet.
Right.
The girls, I'd be if we lost the game, I'd be the quietest one on the bus. But they'd be talking back and forth the same as when we left to go to the game.
Right.
And maybe that's good. I don't know. But it was fun watching. It was fun coaching the girls, and it was a great experience. You teach the same fundamentals with dribbling, passing, shooting. The only difference between the girls' game and the boys' game is the physicality in the middle, in the paint.
Right.
There's a big difference. We used to have to practice against boys.
And one thing about girls, too, especially back in that time, not a lot of points were put up in games. Most games, I think, were like 30 to 28 games, things like that. The other thing is, if I'm not mistaken, I think you're the only coach to take both programs to the tournament. You were the first coach to do it for both. Am I correct? I mean, right. I don't think the girls had.
As far as I know, I'm the only coach in the history of the state high school basketball to take the boys program and girls program to the tournament for the first time each.
Right.
And it only happened because I was there as the boys coach to open the school. And the girls, we had their first varsity season the year that I think the head coach got the job elsewhere, so happened to be there.
Right.
And so it was just happenstance how it happened, but it's almost impossible. There were a lot of guys who coached boys and girls, like Tom McQueenie, for instance.
Yes.
He coached boys basketball and girls basketball.
And went back to boys.
Yeah, and went back to boys.
And even went back to girls years later when,
Yeah. And a lot of guys have done that.
Yeah.
However, to take each one for the first time, you have to have everything. It has to be a perfect storm.
Right.
And that's what happened.
So now, when you retired, I believe you had 30 years at that school.
29.
29. That's a long time, and it's basically been a good majority of your life, as far as the working field goes. I mean, how special is Emmett O'Brien to you even today?
Oh, very special. I mean, that's where I spent a good part of my life. And my professional career was at Emmett O'Brien. And that's where I really got a great start in doing different things. So
right.
I still go over to the school. I watch games, and I'm interested in looking at the redevelopment project now over there. It's $84 million project. It's a new renovation, and so I'm very proud of it. And I was very proud to be part of the original faculty. And there's only one or two of us still alive, so hope it stays that way for a few years. But it was a great experience where I met my wife. She was a teacher in the next room and next door to me, and so that's where I met my wife. That's where I began my basketball career. Actually, I guess you might say Prendergast School is where I began coaching my basketball in a sense.
Right.
But when I was a student teacher up in New York State, I helped coach the basketball team at Wappingers Falls, and my cooperating teacher, he was the head coach. So I kind of really got my roots coaching basketball up in Wappingers Falls, New York.
Right.
We're talking like 64 or 65.
Wow.
And then I came here, and so I go way back.
Wow. I mean, it really is unbelievable what you did as far as coaching. Like I said, we're going to get into this in part 2. It's so hard to even imagine that you've had so much success as a writer or a host, the stuff you've contributed to Major League Baseball, and to still think that you did all this at Emmett O'Brien. I mean, it really is remarkable, and, you should be very proud of yourself.
Well, I've been blessed to have 2 careers, really. One really in kind of sense as a writer, as a journalist, or as a broadcaster, and the other as a coach. And but you know what? And I say this in sincerity, I have a wonderful wife and family who've supported me to do all this.
Right.
I've been away from home a lot too. Nights I'm out coaching, or I'm in New York with baseball. And I've had a wife that has been very supportive. She's a former principal at St. Mary's St. Michael's School,
yep.
And she loves sports, which helped.
It definitely does.
So anyway, we got married. We said for better, for worse, and in wins and in losses.
And one thing about your wife that I remember, and it's been a few years, but
your wife was famous for always having an Elvis party every year. Am I correct?
That's
yes.
right.
Yeah.
My wife was a big Elvis fan, and I remember when he passed, so she was very, very, very emotional. And for 25 years after that, we had an I Remember Elvis party at our home every August.
Right. Yes.
And she was a big, big Elvis fan.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
And in part 2, folks, we are going to hear all about Rich Marazzi's journey to Yankee Stadium, to Major League Baseball, as a writer, an author, and a sports talk show host. For Hometown Heroes, I'm Mike Cannici. Good night, everyone.